somebody who actually likes me for me, and this time I'll let them. Yeah, I like telling stories.
Messy Roots is a graphic memoir by Laura Gao that follows her story from Wuhan, China, which many recognize as the origin of COVID-19, to Coppell, Texas, after immigrating with her family as a child. She guides us through her early years in Wuhan, the culture shock of a sudden switch to American life, and the ostracization she experiences as she tries to assimilate. When she goes back to Wuhan to visit in her teens, she experiences another culture shock after feeling disconnected with her past. She quickly realizes that she doesn't feel a sense of belonging anywhere. She shows us how it feels to be treated as different, how language and silence shapes her relationships, and how her queerness slowly came into focus alongside her cultural identity. As she grows older, she chooses a home of her own and begins to accept how strong, though messy, her roots are. Laura Gao's experience pushes me to create a classroom that's safe for students to explore and express all parts of who they are. Messy Roots teaches me that identity isn't fixed, it's layered, it's evolving, and it's deeply personal to every student that walks into our classrooms. When thinking about emergent bilinguals and multilinguals, three important aspects came up as I was reading through the memoir that I found essential and relatable. The first is inclusive and equitable education, where we honor students' shifting identities and recognize that not all students start in the same place. Cultural responsiveness teaches teachers to listen first and let students show us who they are in their own time. And building strong relationships that grow when we stop asking students to shrink themselves to fit into labels. Instead, we meet them with acceptance and we let them see us too. To offer an inclusive and equitable education in our classrooms, understanding dual or multiple identities is essential. In any classroom, students arrive with layered cultural, linguistic, and personal histories. Labels like Asian American are insufficient because they don't capture the depth or variation among people of Asian descent living in America. But it is a term that is often used both in the memoir and outside of it. People grapple with identity in deeply personal ways. Some may lean into one culture more than another, some may choose to embrace only one, and others may find a balance that works uniquely for them. None of these choices is wrong. Each of them is a valid and personal expression of shifting identities. Umbrella terms like Asian American don't fully represent the plethora of changing identities which is evident in the memoir, as Laura interacts with other Asian students throughout her journey. Her understanding of the very different identities that exist under the label peaks when she is scolded by her college peers for using an offensive term, phobby, nonchalantly in conversation, to put down Asian students who seem to fit right into Asian stereotypes, something she rejects vehemently while living in Texas. Classrooms that are equitable don't reduce students to categories or labels. They don't assign a single story to students that come into the classroom with multiple truths. Some are louder in one moment, some quieter in the next, like an equalizer adjusting for tone and volume at different times. In my classroom, I wouldn't teach identity as something static or singular. I choose memoirs and literature that reflect their contradictions, their silence, personal variation, and moments of internal tension. I'd create space for writing that doesn't rely on simple conclusions. And I'd honor student voices that shift over time and challenge those traditional categories. I would remind students that they're already enough, even when who they are is still unfolding. To be culturally responsive is to notice the ways a student's identity shows up in the classroom and to teach with the understanding that culture is neither just one thing, nor is it static. Culture evolves through memory. It adapts to place, shifts with language, and sometimes hides in silence. In Messy Roots, Laura doesn't define her Wuhanese identity through a list of holidays or foods. Her childhood in China appears in multiple sections throughout the memoir alongside her home in Texas and San Francisco, through shifting panels that highlight the contrasts between one home and another. A reflection of her own shifting identity that rocks back and forth like a boat on the ocean. A culturally responsive teacher doesn't treat identity as a unit in a textbook or a single lesson plan to be taught in a day. That's not something to be solved or labeled. In my classroom, I'd encourage students to write in their native languages or languages they use at home without requiring translation. I'd invite them to include their personal stories and references that might not be familiar to others. I wouldn't ask them to justify those choices. I wouldn't correct them or erase code switching. I choose texts that model reflection, internal intention, and layered identity. I'd slow our pace when needed and allow students time to reflect, write, and respond in ways that feel natural to them. Laura mentions how basketball is an unspoken language for her. Hints such as these can allow teachers to participate in dialogue with students' interests that can be connected to and expressed in an English classroom as well. Out of the three aspects, I think that building stronger relationships is the most essential. I can't express how many times a shy student opened up to me because I showed consistent presence and paid close attention to their lives when they chose to share it. When students are welcome to express themselves in our classrooms through writing assignments meant to connect with them, not evaluate them, they begin to share more and more freely. Emergent bilinguals are often the quietest students in the classroom, something mentioned often in the memoir. They are frequently ignored and least supported, or worse, singled out for their differences without consent. Building a strong relationship starts with creating an environment of belonging. Messy Roots reminds me that many students carry their stories in silence because the space to share it hasn't been made. Laura shared her identity slowly and on her own terms. She allowed her voice to adjust depending on what needed to be expressed. That reminds me not to rush students into articulating their identities in ways that feel unnatural. Teachers can offer more opportunities for students to express themselves through creative, non-performance-based assignments that give them the space they need to share when they're comfortable. Offering assignments that allow them to use code switching could be a great way for students who are straddling different worlds at the same time to express the complexity of their unfolding identities. I also share who I am to show that trust is mutual. Strong relationships are built with reciprocity. When students feel that they are being seen by someone who is also willing to be known, they begin to trust that their voice has space to grow. At the end of Messy Roots, Laura stands at the Yellow Crane Tower, looking out over Wuhan. The city is both familiar and distant, a place she remembers and continues to reimagine. She doesn't tie her story into one final resolution or ask the reader to choose between her identities. She allows everything to remain complicated and honest as she moves towards her future. So to wrap up, inclusive education isn't about categorizing students. It's about recognizing the parts of them that shift in volume and meaning depending on where they are presently. Cultural responsiveness is not about translating every difference into something familiar, but about trusting students to guide us through their own ways of expression. And building stronger relationships starts when we stop waiting for students to simplify themselves in order to be heard, and when we are willing to share in return. When we make room for this, we make room for students to feel whole.